Katya, how many people do you think will listen to this podcast?
Well, I mean, other than the bots that we're going to pay to listen to us, because obviously we are good, noble, honest journalists. I think with the stories we're covering, it's going to be Lukashenko, Vucic, maybe Putin himself, maybe heads of the Georgian Dream Party, because, we're just that important.
And then excluding all of the bots, maybe a total of 20 people. I think considering that when I started my Substack, I got 100 reads on day one, I think 20 sounds like a good benchmark for us to try and exceed.
Well, listen, it's artificial intelligence for a reason. Who says that bots are not sentient with hopes and dreams? Don't discount them like that. But whoever is going to read it, I mean, we'll get it sorted. Let's go.
Welcome to All Out on the Eastern Front, a new podcast where each week we will talk about the most important stories from Eastern Europe and Eurasia. I'm Charlie Hancock. I'm a journalist at the Moscow Times and the author of the Substack Crisis Europa, where I write about European security issues.
And my name is Kat Shenhelia. I'm a student at King's College London. Charlie's actually my classmate, so you got twinsies right here.
I'm your demi-classmate. Kat does war studies. I do international relations and war studies.
Sorry, I'm not as cool as you. But anyway, I'm an ex-journalist currently based in sunny eastern corner of London. So this week, we are joined by Marta Szpala. She's a senior fellow at the Center for Eastern Studies based in Warsaw. Together, she and I will discuss the resignation of Serbia's populist Prime Minister Miloš Vučević and the weeks of protests that led to his downfall, and what comes next for Serbia. But before we hear from Marta, we've each brought a couple stories from the region that we want to talk about. So, Charlie, I'll let you take the lead on this one.
Thanks, Kat. So let's start in Ukraine, a story that has defined our professional lives so far and also a significant part of Kat's personal life. Of course, it isn't the only story in the region. That's one of the reasons why we started this podcast. But there have been some significant developments this week. Firstly, whilst at the time of recording on Thursday, we're still waiting for official confirmation, some sources on the ground have told the Moscow Times that the bastion city of Chasiv Yar to the west of Bakhmut has fallen to Russian forces. Now, it's become a bit of a cliche when talking about Russia's advance in eastern Ukraine that every city is a strategic city. And that is true to some degree, but some cities are more strategic than others. And Chasiv Yar is one of them, because it has an elevation of around about 230 meters around the surrounding countryside, which makes it a very useful staging ground for Russia to support its operations moving further west. It's not that far from the towns of Konstantinivka and most notably Kramatorsk. It will put it on a commanding position above some major roads.
Before we actually move on, it should be mentioned for some of our members of the audience that if they can recall, Kramatorsk is unfortunately a city pained by a very painful history since the commencement of the full-scale invasion. It was a victim of a horrific attack on the central train station with civilians there. And so, as Charlie, just as you pointed out, it remains to be seen what will happen to the civilians living there if Russia really has captured Chasiv Yar.
Yeah, and I don't know how long it will take for any official confirmation to come out about Chasiv Yar's status. If you look at the open source maps that have come out over the past few days, they show that Russia has either taken control of or is still contesting the northern arm of the country. It's in a slightly unusual shape, city. Whereas the southern district of Shevchenko appears to still be under Ukrainian control. However, Shevchenko is much less important because of its lower position, as I explained earlier. And the next Ukrainian headline I want to talk about is the impact of US Secretary of State Marco Rubio's decision to suspend all foreign aid for 3 months. Now, since that announcement, he has released a series of exceptions for programs that provide immediate life-saving aid. But that definition is quite woolly, and it leaves a lot of organizations that still do very important work in really difficult situations. Already, a Ukrainian charity which supports veterans has had to suspend its support line. And it's also had a devastating impact on independent media in the area. I saw somebody who was coordinating lots of local media saying that a local news organization in Kherson region has already had to shut down, and it's affecting much more higher profile Ukrainian news companies. For example, in the case of Slidstvo, who do some excellent in-depth reporting, 80% of their funding came from the United States, and they are trying to work out what to do next. Before we get on to your story, Kat, I just want to make the point of questioning how much of this is actually in the United States' interests. We know, for example, that Russia controls media outlets in Africa and South America, and withdrawing American funding from these regions will only create an even bigger vacuum that Russia and China can fill. And in the case of South America, Russia's media presence is not a direct cause of the migrant crisis. It has a potential destabilizing influence that could be a more proximal factor.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping next week we will get to speak with a couple of folks who are much more familiar with what is taking place in Washington and can fill us in the details. And definitely as a reminder to our audience, a lot of these charities and organizations do have an online presence. So if there is pocket change that you are willing to donate to charities that you feel particularly passionate about, they would be more than happy to have that pocket change. Now, Charlie, big question, banging on the table here. I have a quiz for you.
I love quizzes. I was a competitive quizzer at school, so hit me with this.
Bro, she's a competitive quizzer at school. I was playing video games, okay? So, who won the Belarusian presidential election this week? Very difficult question, I know.
Alexander Lukashenko?
Now, a harder question. $4,000. Do you know what percentage of the... I don't have $1,000, but what percentage of the vote he won by?
Well, Kat, you have just significantly lowered the stakes of this quiz, but I think I saw something like 86%.
And you're almost...
Okay.
Well,
Can I get that?
500. 500. 500.
Okay.
We'll give you half.
100 imaginary dollars.
Imaginary dollars. So on Sunday, January 26th, Belarus held a quote-unquote presidential quote-unquote election in which Alexander Lukashenko was declared the winner with nearly 87% of the vote, securing a seventh term in the office. As a reminder, Lukashenko came into power in 1994. And as a side note, it's quite cute that, the imaginary numbers that he drew up are still less than that of Putin. He wants to position himself like Putin, but doesn't want to get too cocky. So
he's a big man, but the other guy's bigger.
The other guy is bigger, even though Lukashenko is taller. So
you mentioned about when he came into power. I think one thing
1994, yeah.
One thing very interesting about Belarus's experience of the 90s is that it avoided a lot of the economic shocks that affected Russia and other post-Soviet countries by maintaining state control, direct state control, I should say, because there was still something going on with some of these sell-offs over a lot of the major industries.
Exactly, yeah. So, Lukashenko has been in power since. He survived the previous elections in 2020. So, as expected, the election has been widely condemned by opposition figures, mainly Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who ran against Lukashenko in the previous elections in 2020. She ran following the arrest of her husband and kind of is now representing Belarusian opposition from abroad as she was practically chased out of her own country. Tikhanovskaya, she denounced the vote as a senseless farce and urged the international community not to recognize Lukashenko's victory. Although, just like with Yulia Navalny asking the West to not recognize Putin's win in the false elections that happened in Russia last year, it is unlikely that the EU will seize all communications with Lukashenko and his people if there's any communications to be had between Minsk and Brussels. Western governments, mainly the EU, UK and Canada and other allies, they did nominally reject the election results. UK and Canada imposed new sanctions on 6 Belarusian officials, including the chairman of Belarusian Central Election Commission, and 3 defense sector entities that are linked to Russia's military operations in Ukraine. Why they were unable to impose these sanctions earlier, nobody knows.
And also, at this point, Belarus is so cut off from most of the world and so integrated with Russia that what difference are they really going to make?
Exactly. And the EU also criticized Belarus for blocking international election observers and cracking down on independent media, and reiterated the calls to free political prisoners, some of whom, may I remind you, have been in inhumane conditions for years following the crackdown in 2020.
Including Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's husband, Syarkhy.
Exactly, who was the reason why she ran for presidency to begin with. So what's new in Belarus? Nothing. Puki wins elections again.
What?
Puki.
Puki? Who is
He's
Puki?
Puki out of Lukashenko. I don't know what else to call him. I can't curse on the podcast.
I'd accept you calling his dog Puki, as much as that is a word that it triggers my synesthesia in the worst way.
If I'm triggering something like that, it means I'm succeeding. But on that note, Charlie,
it's stuck to the roof of my mouth. I mean, I don't know. Did you see the video of Lukashenko going to vote in this quote unquote election?
I didn't. Tell me about it.
Well, he brought along his little white fluffy dog of some kind. And it is like if, you know Blofeld from the Bond films, and he had this white Persian cat he'd stroke called Solomon.
Maybe that's who he's taking inspiration from. Who knows?
Maybe. If Blofeld had a dog, it would have looked like Lukashenko's little dog.
On that note, I'm passing the torch back to you, Charlie. You have something else to say about Slovakia?
Yes, so we're going to be talking about Serbia and its recent protests. But I also briefly want to mention the protests in Slovakia, calling for the resignation of their Prime Minister, Robert Fico. And these have taken place on a huge scale. So last Friday, the organisers of the protest in the capital, Bratislava, said that 600,000 people turned out. What's the population of Slovakia off the top of your head?
Small, but I remember Bratislava, and it's really a tiny city. Very cute, tiny, with a microscopic U.S. embassy, which kind of tells you the scale of everything.
Exactly. Now, lots of this is to do with energy. Part of Fico's populist approach, and I should note that he has been a lot more favourable towards Moscow than the average Western politician over the past few decades, even at times when relationships were warmer, has been to argue that relations between Bratislava and the Kremlin were good for Slovakia because it would result in Slovakia being insulated from the energy price rises that have affected so much of Europe. And furthermore, it could be very profitable as Slovakia could deliver some of that gas further into Western Europe. That hasn't lasted. Now, how did this gas get to Slovakia? Through pipelines in Ukraine. And
whoa, really? I thought that it teleported all the way from Russia, just magically appeared in Slovakia. Jesus, I wonder why Fico didn't think this one through. Damn.
It has been one of the many cruel ironies of this war that Ukrainian territory has played a role in facilitating one of the largest streams of income for the Kremlin. Now, the deal that enabled this transit expired right at the end of last year, so that gas is no longer flowing. And it doesn't look like it's going to start flowing again anytime soon. Fico has been talking to Moscow a lot, trying to arrange some alternative means of gas transport. Maybe they can negotiate an increase in the amount of gas flowing through a pipeline going under the Black Sea, which fuels Hungary, and then Hungary can send some of it on. Perhaps that will happen one day. This has been seized upon by anti-government protesters in Slovakia, who see a clear connection between Fico's repeated siding with Moscow within the EU and the state their country is in. Remember that after this gas transit deal expired, Fico started threatening Ukraine, not with the army, but with blocking future aid, in a similar way that Hungary's Viktor Orbán has been something of a spoiler within the EU. So that was Slovakia, and now we're going to turn to the main topic of this week's podcast, Serbia, where large protests have toppled their Prime Minister, Miloš Vučević. Katja spoke with Marta Szpala from the Centre for Eastern Studies on Thursday to find out what was behind these protests and what lies ahead for Serbia.
Marta, thank you so much for coming here. I know you are very, very busy. However, hopefully we're not going to bother you too much, but your knowledge on Serbia is definitely bigger than mine.
Thank you for having me, and thank you really for having interest in the topic, because, it's not so prominent in the international media. So it's good that people from outside of Serbia are interested what is happening now, because it's very important.
So let's get right into the first question. Serbian Prime Minister Miloš Vučević, he resigned on Tuesday following weeks of protests. What was the trigger, in simple terms?
So the trigger actually was the catastrophe in the railway station in Novi Sad, which is one of the biggest city of Serbia. The problem was that, sometimes things like that happen, but this time 15 people died. But what is most important is that the railway station was renovated quite recently, and the cost of renovation was quite high. We still don't have proper data, but it cost about 50 million euros. It's definitely too much for such a small station. What is also important that 3 months before the catastrophe, the railway station was opened by the politicians. But after the accident, it appeared that the railway station didn't get proper approval. So the renovation was done, but the expert technicians, architects didn't approve it to use it for wider public. So actually politicians, somehow pretend that everything was done according to the rules and regulation, but apparently it hadn't been done as such.
I was actually going to ask, I remember visiting Serbia a couple years ago, Belgrade specifically, and I recalled my friends who are locals discussing this wide surge of investments coming in from China, from Russia, the United Arab Emirates. And I'm kind of curious now that you're mentioning foreign investments. Can you tell me more? Was this government oversight a failure of kind of the broader negligence that exists within so many governments? Or is this especially acute because this is part of an investment with a foreign state and the government doesn't want to scare away foreign investors?
What is important in this catastrophe, I would say that for Serbian people, it is the symbol how this kind of infrastructure investment are implemented. Because of the corruption, the main point is to give the contracts to the companies who are close to the government. In this case, it was Serbian companies, Hungarian companies. The main contractor was the Chinese companies, and people are complaining that generally, government are not implementing it according to the rules, but in case we have the foreign investors close to the government, the control is even weakened. I would say that this is the strategy of the government to find and get the support from outside. So from foreign governments and from foreign investors, let's put it that way. So it's not only that they want to bring investment back, but first of all, the president has little power in Serbian system, but the system is actually built like that. He is the only person who is taking all important decision in Serbia. So that's why when I speak about the system, and I mainly will be speaking about him because he's the symbol and, the person in charge in Serbia. This is this kind of policy that the government and Vučić tactics is to give the very lucrative, very expensive contracts to the foreign investment. And in exchange, he's getting the support of those governments. This is the question. With China, of course, but now we also have the information that Jared Kushner will be investing in Serbia, building the big hotel and office complex in the city center. They are also companies from the Western countries. It's not only that this is China and Russia, but the control of this kind of implementation of this kind of investment is very, very low. They are getting the tax exception. The old regulation actually are not existing when we speak about what international investors are doing in Serbia. So when we are speaking about the labor code, but also environmental regulation, they are already very weak in Serbia, but still when somebody from outside is coming, like institution, they are not working properly in checking if the international investors are following the local rules. And this is actually the main slogan of this protest. People are saying that if the rules had been followed, this catastrophe wouldn't have happened.
This is a perfect segue, actually, into discussing two things. Let's first start with the Prime Minister himself, Vucevic, and his relationship with Vucic. What is the relationship between these two people? Because the roof collapse happened months ago. He's resigning only right now.
I would say that, and this is the always the thing about the prime minister in Serbia under Aleksandar Vučić. Actually, they are only to obey what president is saying. So they are not actually the political figure who are considering important in the system. Before we have Ana Brnabić, who was actually just she was there just to soften the government image abroad because she was lesbian, she was the woman, she was put there to pretend that president could say that, yeah, we are progressive, we are following the gender balance in the government, but actually her real power was very limited. And Miloš Vucevic, he was also there because, he was supposed to consider as a person who is very efficient in implementing the Vučić order. So actually now his resignation, it has changed nothing. People know that it is just face-saving issue for the President Vučić, that he was chosen to be somehow sacrificed for the sake of the stability of the regime.
So it seems, would it be correct for me to describe that whatever personal relationships Vučić and Vucevic would have had, Vucevic was a sacrificial lamb?
The regime in Serbia is built on, I would say, this is like mafia, that President Vučić somehow assured that people are loyal to him because there is no accountability on the system, in the system. So you can be accused of corruption, some misusing the government funds, but still the impunity is something which is somehow in the system. When the catastrophe happened, the government and nobody from the political elites wanted to take this responsibility. And that's why, resignation after 3 months, now it means nothing to people. Okay, at the very beginning, it would be a proof that government really care and would like to explain what happened and punish those responsible. But now, everybody knows that political elites just afraid of the society who is on the street. I have heard somebody during the protest mention that, it really doesn't matter. The resignation of my grandma, it's as important as his resignations. Back then, it could calm down the situation because it would, Vucevic, he was the mayor of Novi Sad when the contract for reconstruction and modernization of the railway station was signed. He is also the leader of the party, and he is the prime minister. They opened the railway station. It was, in all media, it was the symbol that government is doing something for the society. Everybody profit from, this railway station between Novi Sad and Belgrade is quite important. And it appears this investment was implemented in such a way that it creates danger for the citizen, that it is risky to use it. And this is something what really scared people, and that's why people reacted.
Media reports, they suggested that Vučić, somewhat kind of in the spirit of the Georgia government, has been positioning the protests as something coordinated from abroad. Is it normal for Vučić or the Serbian Progressive Party to position themselves in this way? Is this an everyday rhetoric? If something's bad, it must be coordinated from abroad?
Yeah, of course. I would say that this is also rhetoric for the local public, but also abroad. We have the big protest against lithium mine, who probably will be there. And for the Western governments, he was saying that it's Russian behind the protest. But if something is, somebody is protesting in Russia, they are saying that okay, it's like Western conspiracy. So depends who is talking to. He's blaming different, so let's say, international power centers. So sometimes it's China, sometimes it's Russia, sometimes it's Soros and colorful revolution. And he also said that China's Secret Service warned me about that West is planning a colorful revolution in Serbia. They are actually grassroots protest. It's people who are going on the street and protesting. Also, something which Vučić really likes to do. We call it when we are talking about the Balkans, like this weekend war. When we have the protest, usually he triggers some kind of conflict with the neighbors, usually Kosovo, Bosnia, or something, just to divert the attention and to unify people behind protection of the state stability. And it is also happening now. So we have the big story about what is happening in Kosovo. And we have the big story that about the energy security, because of Russian are quite present in the energy sector. And now the company who is owned by Russia, it is under US sanctions. So that we are on the verge of very serious energy crisis. But actually, people learn the lesson. They know that this is the strategy of the government to create this feeling that you can't protest.
This is really interesting because I wanted to ask about who are the people that are protesting? What kind of groups are taking part in this demonstration?
I would say that everybody are on the streets, like really everybody. What is different that these protests are really led by the students. And it hasn't been the case before. And I would say that all the protests that are happening in Serbia from 2016, we have actually regular protests there because of different things. But usually local one, sometimes sectoral one. Farmers are protesting for quite a while. We have the protest of the teachers, like different, let's say, strata of the society. But now, all these different people who are protesting on different issues actually united in this protest. This is also something which I think really scared Vučić, because he usually played protesters quite well. Now people know that it is happening. People are really aware that somebody could provoke them. We have a lot of this kind of radari, it's called in Serbian, so people who are responsible for order during the protest. They are also cleaning after the protest. They want to show that they are responsible, that protests are peaceful, and they are very clean. They are not destroying anything. They just want to have justice, accountability, and rule of law in place.
To wrap up, and you started talking about it, I mean, are there any more problems on the horizon for Serbia? You mentioned the energy crisis, but what else?
I would say, and this is that, we in Serbia, we in Poland, we are saying that to have a change in the country, you need streets and foreign support. So we have the people on the street, but actually, when we are talking about abroad, there is a silence. And this is quite problematic, that although the internal position of current government is weakened, it has no legitimacy, but he is still supported by various international actors. Actually, Richard Grenell, person who closely cooperates with Trump, he already tweeted that, you can't change the government on the street. Also from European Union, who is officially really supporting, pushing for the democratization of the state, because Serbia is officially the candidate to the European Union. So I would say the EU is like really silent about that. We haven't observed any comments from the high-level politicians. There were some comments about brutality towards the protesters. That's true. But it's still too little. It was like they pretend nothing is happening in Serbia, that everything it's all right. So they gave additional legitimacy to Vučić as the president, starting from Arabian Spring, which at the beginning we had a lot of hope, and then it creates a lot of instability. This is like the general approach of the West to this kind of event.
What else? Give us a quick rundown.
Okay. I would say that, of course, the system of the governance is the main problem. But I would say that for Serbia, the main problem is like brain drain and migration. It's like people are leaving, and they are leaving not because of economic reason anymore, but actually the quality of living and general political situation in Serbia. When you visit the Belgrade, you can see that the traffic is on the verge of collapse. The public transport is not functioning. When you check the electricity system, we had the blackouts in the system. So actually, this is also the result of incompetence of this government, that they are chasing only, I would say, corruption rent. They are not thinking about the structural problems which should be solved. So I'd say that this is a problem.
Marta, thank you so much for coming here. Sorry to bother you early in the morning for both me and you, and we hope to see you next time.
Yeah, please follow the protest in Serbia, and you can also join the protest. Diaspora is also organizing protests, so they are taking place everywhere on the globe, on the various American cities, but also in whole Europe. Supporting them right now, it's really important for them.
We have one last news story this week, and it's actually about Georgia, which I can't not mention.
So you are half Georgian,
half Ukrainian, born in Russia. People beg for a sexy combo like that, dude, and I got it for free.
It's just such a shame that passport combination, it doesn't give you that many rights globally. I mean, ordinarily, as a mononational, albeit one with a Dutch resident permit, I would love to have a second passport to give me more working rights all over the world. However, I wouldn't go for any of yours. No offense.
Need I remind you, you had an empire and lost all of it. Moving on.
Not my fault.
Well, no, I'm just going to blame you for it. But let's move on to the last story of this week, because Georgia, I got to mention and shill for my mother's motherland. So this Wednesday, January 29th, the Georgian parliamentary delegation withdrew from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, or PASE, after the assembly passed a resolution urging Georgia to be more democratic, basically, by asking it to hold new elections and release political prisoners by April. Tea Tsulukiani, complex, I know. She is the head of the delegation, and she's also the deputy prime minister and the Georgian minister of culture, and one of the main shills of the ruling party, Georgian Dream, or Nightmare, as we call it. She rejected the resolution as unacceptable and an attack on Georgia's sovereignty, stating that complying with these requests would betray over 1 million voters who backed the Georgian Dream Party. She obviously failed to mention that they backed under pressure of physical assault and starvation. As a result, Georgia has suspended its participation until what it sees as external pressure ends. The move follows Georgia's contested 2024 elections, criticized for alleged vote buying and intimidation, which have sparked ongoing pro-European protests.
Could you go a bit further into those issues with the election?
Well, if you recall, Georgia has had multiple protests spanning for multiple months now, even before the elections, that have everything to do with quite a lot of similar issues with what Serbia is actually facing, which is corruption within the government and the elitism at the cost of an average citizen. The Georgian Dream Party basically decided that they are going to establish a Russian-style foreign agent law, which would basically cause more scrutiny to NGOs that provide critical services to Georgia's vulnerable. All right, so think of USAID, think of all the EU funding, all of that goes to help people who should actually be helped with the taxes that Georgians pay. And after the Georgian government initially stepped back from implementing the foreign agent law after it received the candidate status, in a couple months' time, it decided, hey, this foreign agent thing, yeah, it caused this controversy and all of that, but let's bring it back, which they did. This law has since basically enacted a widespread campaign of repressions against journalists and so much more. So yet again, this is another step in a continuing saga of Georgia under its current leadership becoming more and more like Kremlin's Russia. But such a result was to be expected.
Thanks, Kat, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about Georgia over the course of this podcast. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us for our first episode of All Out on the Eastern Front, and thank you to Marta for joining us as our first guest. Please join us next week at 6 p.m. London time on either Spotify or YouTube. And if you like what we do and what we hope to do in the future, the software we use and the food for our cats aren't going to pay for themselves. So a link to our Patreon page will be provided in the show notes.
You can get in touch with us via Twitter at Hancock2001, or if you want to contact me at Eshenhelia. If you can't spell my last name, do not worry. The links to our social media accounts are also available in the show notes below.